Welcome to the locally led conservation tooth, we're calling it. This is the afternoon kickoff of the first session. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. This is important to us. We put a lot of time and effort into it. And the importance of the NRCS and SWCD partnership is something that we really value and put a lot of emphasis on for the delivery of locally led conservation. We wouldn't be where we are today without all of you on the call, so thank you for your efforts. And this locally led component is really a key part of conservation delivery for many, many years, starting back in the 96 Farm Bill, but continuing forward as being a critical component of what we do, how we do it, to address the needs of our customers across the state of Minnesota. So the goal of this training series is to improve the locally led process at all levels of Minnesota, and the entire process really starts and relies on you at the local levels and your local working group meetings. That helps feed conservation across the state, and we'll get into some more details of that throughout the training. So in the remainder of the series, we're going to cover a variety of topics, hopefully showing you the value and importance of locally led and giving you the information and some additional tools that you'll find useful in your local efforts. So I ask that you be open today, share your experiences, thoughts, successes with each other in the chat when we open it up for discussion, because we all have something to share and learn. We have a wide variety of participants today. Some have been doing this for many, many years. Others, this is their first time through the locally led process. So hopefully we can all benefit from today's shared experience. So again, thank you for coming today. And with that, I want to turn it over to some comments that are recorded from Leanne Buck with MASWCD.
Leanne sends her greetings and is at a funeral today. And so otherwise she would be with us, but she sends her greetings.
Served as the Executive Director for the Minnesota Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. I want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your busy work schedules to share your insight on engaging others with identifying resource priorities. For those of you that have been around me, I use the phrase mission, meaning, and purpose quite a bit. And this is what drives so much of our public work. So speaking from the SWCD perspective, what does this phrase of mission, meaning, and purpose have to do with local working groups? For districts, our mission is private lands conservation. NRCS also has a similar mission. And the reason SWCDs were created was to complement and bridge local ideas with the federal effort. It's one of the main reasons why districts have locally elected supervisors. It is our citizen connection to the communities and the landowners we serve. I look back and the USDA attorneys and policy leaders that created the SWCD statute 75 years ago were focused on ways to link the technical assistance with the important role of garnering input to bridge policies and programs with landowners, as well as helping to identify resource concerns. To this day, the federal local working group policy supports what our early policymakers determined what was so important to accelerating soil and water conservation district practices, or conservation practices in general. So NRCS and SWCD programs have evolved, but some things still stay the same, including a process to garner citizen input. In a world of deadlines, workloads, program delivery, and requests for assistance, it's easy to sometimes take for granted the important role we have for taking time to listen, to hone in our messaging, and share our collective values as conservationists. This locally led training series is an opportunity to reflect on our fundamental work and learn from each other as a resource professionals, and more importantly, as leaders for our ongoing and what I would say collective work with civic engagement and private lands conservation. So as we segue to produce this series, we are working with Lisa Hines with the University of Minnesota Extension and Donna Ray Sheffert Leadership Tools. They have years of training and experience with civic engagement, and we so appreciate their knowledge and this opportunity to have them help us learn from each other. So with that, I'd like to say next on our program is Donna Ray Sheffert, who will be moderating this session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. And I will take that years of experience as a compliment today and move forward. So we have Lisa, who's going to give us an overview of our session today.
All right. I think I'm unmuted. That is correct. Great, great. Sometimes these things happen, right? So today we're going to focus on making local input matter, and the why and the how things work. Our agenda in particular today is to start off with that why, because it does matter, and how it impacts your local conservation. We're going to have a chance for you all to have some conversation with each other in small groups and breakout rooms. And then one of the things we heard is that you really want to hear examples of participation methods that work well. So we have a segment there where you're going to get to hear from a colleague. We've woven those throughout the series as well. And we finish on a kind of intent and process of locally led before we get to the closing at the end of the day. So with that, I want to just highlight for you, many of you probably took this survey last October. Part of this process was to find out like what's working well, what's not, what do you want to know about? And you got these survey results. So I won't go into detail, but I really want to highlight, we had almost 200 people participate, mostly staff from NRCS and SWCDs, but also a significant number of supervisors as well. And that informed how we went about this training design for the 4 weeks. So you're going to hear examples. You're going to hear some of the link between aligning plans. You'll also hear some things about like what's changing or what's the impact. And of course, part of what we want to do is over the course of this series, really give you opportunities, not as much today because we're heavy on sharing, but give you opportunities to share your ideas and your input so that we are learning in the process as well, because this is not a one-way street. So with that, I want to pass to Donna Ray for the next segment.
One of the key themes that came out of the survey was, why do we do this? And the point about it, as Leanne said, it's been in guidance for a number of years, and yet our environment around us has changed in terms of citizens and residents wanting to provide input and so on. So we're really starting with the why in this first session. Why do you do what you do and what's the purpose? And in subsequent sessions, we'll get more into the how and the what. So I wanted to share a quick example of a why framing. So a man was standing in a line and he was asked by a stranger what he did for a living. And he replied, "I am helping support our future workforce." And there was a bit of a puzzled look on the face of the stranger. So the man added, "Well, I'm a maintenance person in elementary school. What I do is clean up after kids." Well, you can imagine it was more compelling to be connected to the greater good or the big why than it was to maybe do the tasks at hand. So we're suggesting to be connected to the big why, and you see our local branding and so on for this series. One of the ways we want to engage you each time is some sort of interactivity, and playing on the word local, we have asked each of our speakers to share their birthplace. And you have a spot in your notes that were sent in the pre-meeting packet. So we're going to start with Lisa. Lisa, your birthplace.
I was born near Buffalo, New York. So I'm a transplant for many decades now. This is home. How about you, Donna Ray?
And I was born in Minot, North Dakota. So we invite you on your notes to put down the birthplaces as well as any key messages that you want to remember from this series. So with that, we want to do a quick move through the Zoom orientation in case that's a newer tool for you.
Yeah, so I'm just going to do a very quick overview, but we do have the chat. Some of you have weighed in already on where you're calling from or where you're zooming into from today, and we've got folks from around the state. It's also a way that we really encourage your questions, your comments, and you can send to the whole group, the everyone piece, or you can send to a particular individual, me or other presenters as well. So that's a possibility. We also know hearing, that's a good thing to be able to do. I'm assuming that's the case because I haven't been getting messages saying, "I can't hear you." And you'll notice that microphone at the bottom has a little upward arrow kind of thing. You can test your speakers or whatever there. And then last of all, we won't have a lot of speaking for you here in this large room, but when you go into your breakouts, you're going to want to make sure that you unmute so that you can visit with your colleagues and hear some ideas and share your ideas as well. So with that, then I'm going to pass it to Donna Ray. Oh, that's right. We have our polls. So we wanted to start off with a quick poll for you, a little bit of interaction. Speaking of birthplace bingo, do you work 40 miles or more from your birthplace? Go ahead and weigh in. And then the second question as well, have you seen changes in the place where you've been born? Things like land use, who owns the land, who farms the land. And then we go from very little change at all in that place to a lot of change. Oh, they are popping in very quickly here. Lots of folks. Great, great. And this really goes to what's local to you and what's local to the people that you work with. You know we have watersheds and county boundaries, but we really want to prime the pump here a little bit with some of your own thinking about where are you from and how have things changed, if at all. All right, so we've got almost 80% of weighed in. I'm going to show you very quickly. Most of the group, this is a little different than this morning. This morning we had 120 people on, and we had a much larger group who were living more than 40 miles. And that lots of change, several and a lot. Yeah, definitely. Oh, sorry, I forgot to share that. My apologies. I was reading my own screen and forgetting to share with you. But it gives you an idea of some of the frame of reference that we're coming at this day. So with that, then, now I will pass to Donna Ray to get us started with our panel.
Yes, so and throughout the series, we have a number of guest presenters, and we're very pleased today to have Troy Daniel with NRCS, Tom Schultz with SWCD and is on the Bowser board, and Jamie Beyer, who works in a watershed district, is a farmer and is also president of the Minnesota Soybean Growers. And so we are asking them to start with their birthplace, so you can put that on your bingo board and see where to make the key messages, and we'll go from there. So we've asked them for about 4 minutes of comments, and then if you have questions for them, we'll be able to have a few minutes for that. So Troy, welcome, and welcome for your comments.
Thank you, Donna and Lisa. And it's good to visit with everyone this afternoon. My birthplace was Terrell, Texas. It used to have a sign that said the cleanest, whitest cotton and the dirtiest, darkest land. It's Black Land Prairie. And because of local-led conservation and a little bit of uncontrolled urban sprawl, the landscape has changed a lot. A lot of the ground was cotton and corn and beans, and now a lot of it's CRP and grass. There's still some farming, but not to the scale that it was 30 years ago. Urban sprawl, sadly, has concreted a lot of really good farmland. So that's a place where maybe local-led conservation may have not got what we wanted over the years and maybe mitigating some of that urban sprawl. But today we're here to talk about why local-led matters. I said this before, it's over 80 years ago that local conservation districts and the Hugh Hammond Bennett concept came to fruition through the Soil Conservation Service and the local SWCDs. They were local-led from the start. And they used to have input sessions in each little community. I've got photos of my family members at these input sessions talking about how do we solve the Dust Bowl problems. That concept has not changed. It's still about bringing farmers in, landowners, various groups that have a stake in the game, whether it's watershed districts or local forestry associations or commodity groups, county commissioners, county extension agents. There's a lot of input that's needed when you're trying to figure out what is the highest priority for conservation and agriculture, quite frankly, in a local community. I think most of us hopefully know that top-down and central planning rarely works well. It rarely works well at the ground level. So for us at NRCS, it's imperative, not only by law, but it's just imperative for us to be successful to have that local input. to identify the resource concerns, to identify some of the human concerns, whether it's economic issues or social, cultural issues. It's a major concern in much of the United States now, where small communities are going away, where school districts barely have enough money to fund because of the changes in farming and the landscape. So those kind of things need to be at the table and discussed in those local work group meetings. So what it means for NRCS, though, is it's not a decision maker. Those are decisions, federal funds and federal technical assistance all relies on me and my staff and our chief. But we give a really, really high credence to the local input. We rely heavily on those local work groups who are partners to be a voice for me to figure out how to best prioritize our technical and financial assistance. And I want to emphasize technical assistance because I think that gets left in the background sometimes. But as recently as this year, we've made decisions to change some of the makeup of our staff as far as types of positions. We're going to have a few more agronomists on our staff. We're going to have some grazing specialists. We're going to have some foresters on our staff. A lot of that decision came from input from local work groups. So that's just an example of many. It's not all about the funding. That's a piece of the puzzle. It's just about putting the pieces of the puzzle together to figure out what we need to do. Thank you.
Donna Ray, you're muted.
Thank you, Troy. And up next is Tom Schultz coming to us from the Wadena SWCD. Tom.
Good afternoon, everyone. And Troy was telling about his background, and I'm one of those people that have never left home. So I was born in Wadena County, was still reside in Wadena County, and my grandfather homesteaded the farm that I live on back in 1888. But I was just thinking about what our soil was telling us as Troy was telling us about, these processes and technical services that NRCS has given to us. And I remember the discussion with my father about, we had this large Drumlin Hill, and Drumlin Hill is a large hill that exists in central Minnesota, left over from what happened with the glaciers. And we had this beautiful hill that needed some conservation work to make it work better. And my father was a strong believer in keeping a lot of vegetation on the ground in a permanent fashion. But as we looked at this, we needed to do something a little bit different. We were really the second owners that we knew of this property. And he said on this one corner, I said, well, this doesn't look right. What's wrong here, Dad? And he was saying, oh yeah, our owner before us, he planted corn up and down the hill, and it caused some problems here. And that's why you see this disturbed landscape. And so we laid out contour strips on that drumlin, and we still farm them today. And I'm really pleased with what the results of that was. And there were other things that happened because of that. Now, how does that relate to how we relate to conservation? And I think I had a lot of discussions with farmers about how they were doing things on their farms. And one farmer told me, I've always struggled to get the biggest fields possible. And what I've found is that now I've got erosion that I didn't have before. Now, unfortunately, we didn't get to work with him to get that straightened out, but his son came to us and we were able to work that out on his farm as well. So as we see these practices and this technical advice being given out there in the countryside, it is a way for us to relate to people and their conservation problems that they have on their farm so that they can achieve better success with that. Now, as we go to the future, it's going to be imperative that as we look at what we do on farms, probably the most futuristic person I ever had talk to me about that was from the Netherlands. And he said, what I do on my farm is grow clean water. I had never thought about it in that regard. And the way they were accomplishing that in the Netherlands was kind of different. He said, one of the problems we've had is that the conventional male farmer won't embrace the skill set that they need to grow clean water on their farms. And so he said, we've been really busy getting women involved in the management decisions to make this happen. Well, where does this all go for us then? We need to take all those new and exciting ideas and wrap them together so that as we experience the conservation efforts of our farms, we're able to go forward with the right tools on the right place at the right time. So I think that would be the summation of what I have to say today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Jamie, welcome.
Hi all, I'm Jamie Beyer, born in Ortonville, Minnesota. My family farms on the border in west central Minnesota and a little into South Dakota. I'm currently serving as the president of the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association, and my off-the-farm job is as administrator of the Bois de Sioux Watershed District, which is a very busy watershed. So I have one foot in agriculture and another in local government. Over the past 5 years, with direction from our own landowners, our watershed has been initiating and completing major water quantity and quality projects to the tune of spending $2 million+ a year and involving 50 to 100 or more landowners each year. All of our projects are landowner driven and government supported, which results in significant successful projects that achieve both landowner goals and government objectives. I'd first like to talk a little bit about the landowners that I work with, and then give you 3 important tips to be successful with locally driven projects. In my district, 90% of the landowners that we work with are farmers. So as a farmer and working with farmers, farmers love farming. They talk about it, they read about it, they watch it on TV, they're on Twitter, they're on YouTube, they're on Facebook, they dream about it. At my house, we receive at least 4 professional agricultural magazines each week. Farmers are bombarded with professional advice, and some of it is free and some of it we pay for. On my farm, we contract with an agronomist, a weed scout who also does pests, and a precision ag nutrient specialist. We also pay for multiple email newsletters that give us rapid, cutting-edge information about what's going on in the area and around the world. And I bring all of this up because when it comes to agriculture, government is not the leading edge here. Our job is to support what landowners want to do. So Tom just pointed out a couple of farmers who looked at their land and said, I've got a problem and I'm curious about the solutions. And I think that's an excellent example of what we're supposed to be doing. So I've got 3 tips to be successful with landowner-driven projects. The first one is earn a reputation for completing projects, and start small if you need to, and make sure to publicize your results. Landowners are customers, and happy customers will spread the message of the success for you. And by tackling the smaller projects, you'll build confidence with landowners that you can handle larger projects. Tip 2 is to work collaboratively and cooperatively with other organizations. We have fantastic SWCD, county, and watershed folks in Minnesota who are always looking for ways to partner. And partnering helps you to meet and get to know landowners. You gain experience and understanding of what projects are desired in your county. And always remember that when you're working with a landowner now, you might be working with that landowner in another part of the county on another project. We have lots of landowners that overlap. The last tip is probably the most important. Tip number 3. Know the cost and the benefit of the proposed project to your landowners, and you can describe it in monetary terms. The math isn't hard when you take the time to work it all out. So I was recently in a session, and it was being proposed some farming practice now for row crops, and they framed it as only a loss of 5 bushel an acre. Now, I've got an app on my phone, so I know how much a bushel of soybeans is worth, which is $13 now, and corn is at $5. So if you have a farm of 2,000 acres and half are in corn and half are in soybeans, that 5-acre loss is going to cost the farmer $90,000 in gross profit. And that's money that goes towards paying the rent, the equipment, and all the inputs. So when that farming practice gets proposed in that light, you know, a landowner isn't going to see any benefit out of that. They just see cost. So when we're putting together projects, we make sure that they're designed with a local benefit in mind. So the majority of our projects are flood reduction projects in the watershed. And so a farmer understands intimately how many acres they're losing each year to repeated floods. So what we can do is take this project that benefits them, increases their productivity, and then we can add clean water aspects because they support this type of project. And as long as the cost and benefit makes sense and it's reasonable, we found that landowners are very willing to sign on to these projects and also to put extra money into them if so needed. So in closing, I commend NRCS for their focus on this topic of locally led conservation. I've seen firsthand how landowner-driven projects make the impossible possible, both for landowners and for local government. And we can accomplish a lot more together than we would each separately. And I look forward to working with you folks both on the farm and as a partnering LGU. So thank you.
Thank you. I think the pride of Terrell, Texas, Wadena, Minnesota, and Ortonville, Minnesota, in terms of these wise remarks about why local-led conservation matters. So Terry Peters has asked you, Jamie, what is the app that you use when you were figuring out your estimate in your example?
So I'm in the Wheaton-Dumont area. So we've got an app called Bushel for the Wheaton-Dumont Co-op elevator. And that's what I've got on my phone. I would contact your local elevator and see what app they use. You know, everybody's doing their marketing on their phones now. So it's also a good mood indicator. So if you're going into a meeting and prices are low, you might approach things differently than if prices are high.
Well, thank you very much. And we are going to transition to our next segment. And that is some of the impacts that we see both monetarily and in the human capital through the local work groups. So that will be Keith Klobeck, who begins that section. And then we will hear a brief, again, recording from Leanne Buck.
All right, thank you, Donna Ray. Appreciate the transition. Are you able to see my slides? All right, Lisa's giving me a head nod, thank you. So starting off, my birthplace, Alexandria, Minnesota, to kick it off. And what I'm going to talk to you about now is the impacts of local working groups. As Lisa mentioned in the opening, from the survey, finding value in our process and the locally led process, where it goes, where that information is utilized, how it impacts things beyond your local county. That was one of the main topics that was brought up. So my goal today is to shed some light on that, how your local input and decisions are used locally, but then beyond that at the local level, where it goes next. So the big message today too is that local working groups and locally led is not just NRCS programs. We have a lot of great programs, but we don't have the staff and capabilities to get to everyone. So this is a bigger input. You heard it from Tom and Jamie, Troy, you'll hear it from others. And there's just much more than NRCS and NRCS programs to this. The technical assistance, the other local needs, the other local opportunities are all part of this locally led process and local impacts. Local working groups also impact the following: determining outreach and targeting, planning, training needs, staffing, prioritization, program delivery, and then ranking and funding. One example of this is, Troy mentioned some of the stuff with our staffing. So from some of the local input about additional needs for specialists in agronomy or grazing, that's led us to additional trainings and additional staffing added to NRCS. The same would apply to our other partners. So it's more than just the programs. It really encompasses all the things we do and all the things that we need to deliver that local conservation. So the rest of local work group impacts, what happens to your decisions after the meeting? Are they bundled up in a file, stuck in the drawer and revisited again next year? We hope not. Hopefully you are reviewing them and acting on them at the local level, but beyond that, where do they go? And then what's done with them? So I want to give you a little bit of background on that as well. All of your local work group summaries are compiled and routed to us in St. Paul for NRCS. We then compile them by area, team, office, depending on our fund pools, and state level, and route them through the State Technical Advisory Committee. So local working groups are actually a subcommittee of the State Technical Advisory Committee. There are several partners, SWCD staff, conservation groups involved in this committee, and they provide recommendations and input to NRCS by advising the state conservationist. So this is our version at the state level of really a local working group. The state conservationist, you heard it directly from Troy, he relies heavily on this information for decision making and prioritization of local control and local input. One of the handouts you have is something I created just for those of you that are more visual. I apologize. I am not in the graphic design industry for a reason, but I think this gets the point across of really how this information flows in several ways. We have all these needs, opportunities, concerns, and priorities out there that you at the local level are more in tune to than many of us at the state or an area level. But there's also additional things that come forward to local staff from our producers, partners in the community. That's the value of this local grassroots, starting at that lowest level, feeding information up to the local working group, the local staff for local decision making. And then, as I mentioned, going to the State Technical Advisory Committee and ultimately to the state conservationist that then inform state level decisions. There's also additional mechanisms for feeding information to state conservationists through resolutions, meetings, other input. But this is a locally led, local working group process that is the documented method that we use to compile all this information and help deliver our conservation efforts. So along that theme of finding value and locally led, we have a quiz. So it popped up on the screen. You're participating here, so please check the box. But the question is, in 2018, what % of Minnesota Environmental Quality Incentive Program, so EQIP, and Conservation Stewardship, CSP general funds, were placed in area level or lower funding pools? So either at the NRCS area levels or down into team or county level pools.
And just so folks know, Keith, they are anonymous polls, so no worries. We know we're in a learning curve here. If you don't know, or if you're guessing, or maybe you do know, we want you to learn here. This is our learning curve. And they are jumping in. We got about half. Ooh, they are moving quickly now. The pondering is transitioning. We're getting up towards 70%. We'll finish this in just a moment.
And this is 2018, where we were just 3 years ago.
Okay, I'm going to pause it and share.
All right, the consensus or the majority was 60% of the funds went to area and lower level pools. The answer in 2018, in Minnesota, 0% of our funds were at that local level. So in 2018, we had all of our funding pools at the state office level, and in CSP, we had some different regions. They weren't specifically tied to areas. And so that's some of the change that we've made to find value in the locally led process. So the follow-up question, now 2021, this year, what % of Minnesota EQIP general funds have or will be placed in area or lower funding pools is the first question. The second question, you may have to scroll down to see the whole question, but in 2021, what % of Minnesota CSP general funds have or will be placed in area or lower funding pools? So 2 questions here because they are different percentages this time. And as you can see by the choices, it is not 0. We've made improvements.
Hey, good point there, Keith. And reinforcing the message, right? It was 0, now we're moving into higher percent. We've moved out of the basement. All right, and it looks like there's a bit of a pause, so I'm going to close the poll and share.
All right, 72% and 100. I have to say, you are an awesome and well-informed group, or the earlier group fed you answers. But either way, you are great, because for EQIP, 72% of our current year funds are targeted towards those area or lower funding pools. This year, it's the conservation service teams. We're moving money down to that level for EQIP. And then in CSP, we've recently moved to having all of our funds in area pools. So those reflect those local priorities from the areas for CSP. So well done. You guys nailed the results. So the takeaway, major improvements, hopefully finding value, $0 locally and at the area level to quite a few dollars going out in those programs. The other big thing that we get a lot of questions on is how does this play into NRCS? So back to the program side, screening and ranking. And we have now, the last 2 years now, this conservation assessment and ranking tool where we look at prioritizing the resource concerns and categories, practices, and also local ranking questions. And these are directly related to the summaries of local working group, the locally led conservation efforts. We do not make up percentages for resource concerns or categories or prioritize different practices and systems. We directly tie it back to the sum of the local working groups. So the bottom of this slide shows the priorities for Minnesota. This was last year's local working groups. All local working group summaries for cropland prioritized sheet and rill erosion as #1, nutrients, sediment, organic matter down the line. So that is directly what we used and are using this year for program delivery. We're setting up all of our funding pools to mirror that and focus on those efforts, on those resource concerns, the priorities that were established at that local level. Locally led, finding value. So at the state level, what we're trying to improve on and do a better job on is reporting results and impacts. It's easy for us to say we spent $27 million in EQIP, but where and what? And some of the challenges are with our software changing, being able to gather data. Sometimes we rely on our national office and can't get it as timely as we'd like, but we still do run summaries. Hopefully you're getting them through your local office or in our annual reports. But an example of that, here's the 2020 data for the top 10 EQIP practices. You can see what they are and what was spent. And if that doesn't align with meeting the needs and priorities of the local led conservation efforts, we tweak that going forward. So the following year, we'll make some adjustments to our prioritization, our ranking questions, trying to better hit that target. And then the bottom half of the slide is locally led, finding local value. So this is something that we expect you to do at the local level. And it does take a little extra work, but finding the local value involves your locally led resource concerns and priorities. And then similarly to what we're doing at the state level, what was the result of that? Summarizing them, evaluating it, putting it on paper for the next meeting or to inform the community of how much was spent, where, why, and then adjusting. So if you didn't hit the target this year, what are some adjustments you can make next year to get there? So in summary, locally led influence is much more than just NRCS program delivery. Locally led informs NRCS and partners at all level, from that local community all the way up through the state conservationist and state level decisions. And then increases in local funding, we hope, are making finding value in the process much easier. It still takes some preparation and work to show that value and impact, but that's a key part of the success and engagement and buy-in to the local process. With that, that is it.
Thank you, Keith.
All right.
Lisa, has any question for Keith in this topic appeared in the chat?
I don't see any questions.
Okay. So again, you're welcome to use the chat. So we're now going to hear from Leanne Buck as she prioritizes and thinks about return on investment of conservation dollars.
One of the things that I was thinking about as I was putting together some thoughts on locally led conservation, as well as how the local working group impacts your local conservation efforts, I was thinking back to something that our partnership, when I say the Conservation Delivery Partnership, I look at it as the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, and of course the MASWCD and our collective soil and water districts across the state. And one of the things we did back in 2000, I believe it was 2016 and 17, we had compiled an economic report. And I thought that would be worth sharing because again, it's one place where we have our collective data of our three organizations. And so the reminder here is what we do. Many of you are putting in data and information for soil and water districts. You do it through the eLink reporting system. And we do have a lot of outcomes and prioritized, target, measurable aspects of our collective conservation work. But here I'm more or less focusing on some of the economics. So a reminder is that conservation programs impact local economies with changes in whether it's production, recreation, jobs, taxes, and spending. And so as we look, here's one of the key components that we put together. If you look at this table, basically what it's saying is the funds spent by the partnership. So NRCS back in 2016, we were looking at 135 million, over 135 million from NRCS. Then we also took into consideration the Conservation Reserve Program, which is administered by the Farm Service Agency. That was another 114 million, almost 115 million. The state of Minnesota had information. A lot of that is the Natural Resources Block Grant and some of the activities associated with that. And for soil and water districts at the time, we were looking at almost 49 million. So collectively, if you think about it, that's over $305 million that is public conservation funding. And it also references total jobs. And this is not jobs associated with the activities that we do as personnel, but it's the economics and the generation of jobs across the state. So here's another way of looking at that data. And it's just a nice pie chart. And you can see the components. Again, the federal dollars have a lot of information and impact to what happens to Minnesota's conservation efforts, but so do the soil and water conservation districts and the state partnership. And of course, what I want to say too, this is one shot in time. As soil and water districts, we know we are also with the Clean Water Legacy Funds, and there is more state money coming in through that effort. But again, this gives you a sense of some of the combination of our collective partnership and the impacts we have. And when I think about the economics, it could be everything from the private contractors you have. This is a photo that the Pope SWCD recently shared in 2020. It also could be seed dealers and just different individuals in your communities that are also having an economic benefit from some of the activities, not only just the landowner. Another way of looking at it too is the value to the economy. Again, there's that $305 million collectively that we did, but the value added. And again, this data is based on economic data that NRCS had economists work on this. It's using software data. It's called IMPLAN for those of you that might be technical. And again, it's software that's well used in other federal government agencies. It's something that was born out of the University of Minnesota. So again, there is credibility behind these numbers, and I thought it was worth sharing. The other piece too, again, this is another way, again, the partnership. If you look at the different pieces of the pie, again, $411 million at added value to Minnesota. So those are some of the contributions that each of us contribute, again, to the conservation of Minnesota. And one of the things too that periodically my folks will ask for is, well, what's that value added multiplier? How did we come up with that? And again, it's some of the data that's worked with the modeling of this in-plan economic data. But you will see, again, how that multiplier. So for NRCS programs, for every dollar that was spent, we had a return or a multiplier of 19 more cents above that dollar. For CRP payments, it was 51 cents. State of Minnesota, again, you'll see that. For soil and water districts, you had a 1.4 multiplier. So again, that is some of the calculations that goes into the important work that we're doing. So this is just a snapshot in time. This was economic data that was generated by the partnership. And so it gives you a sense of whether you take this by your field office and or you kind of look at it now for soil and water districts. We've got a lot of reporting that's done on a watershed scale. But I
Our assumption is that we've had opportunity now to have several thoughts that have gone your direction. And we're recommending you use the notes pad. And just to share that Leanne's hometown is Tracy, Minnesota. But we are going to be moving into breakout groups. So a couple reminders. You will get a message on your screen about accept a breakout group. And so say yes, and then you'll be in a small group. And this is our recommended question. How can I demonstrate that my governmental unit is open to input and fairly serving constituents? And when you get into your breakout, be sure you unmute. We had questions in an earlier session about we can't hear anybody, but unmute and then mute when you come back to the large group. And someone just start. Just share your thoughts about this and have a friendly conversation. So we're going into breakout discussions.
Of overview on what participation methods work well. And so as we go into this, I want to just start on some of what works well when you're creating meaningful participation. And this theme is woven throughout this series. So you're going to hear ideas and examples in every session, not just here. But we do want to get to our example here because we've got a treat for you. I first want to start off with a little bit of a framework for you as you think about good participation, okay? And the idea here, if you've seen this before, it's going to be very familiar. And if it's new to you, I want to share it. We'll go deeper in a future session, but it can really help you be more intentional about your design and your public participation practice, because you want to be clear about what the goals and promise you're making to the public. Like I said, we're going to go over it briefly now and revisit it in session 3. So I want to just go from left to right. You're going to see this is from the International Association of Public Participation. They are world renowned for this work. And this is probably their biggest product. I've actually been a member of this association. If you look on the left, you've got the lowest level of public involvement with Inform, where you're just basically telling people what you need to do. You go to consult, you're adding a little greater level of public participation. You're asking for public feedback on ideas or decisions or directions. You move a little further, you're into involve, where you're working more directly with the public to keep those public concerns and aspirations right into the mix of the work that's happening. Then you get to collaborate, even higher level, where it's really partner is the word that comes to mind, and it's right there in front of you as well. And then you move to the top end where you've got the greatest amount of public participation, and that's around putting the decision in the hands of the public. We all do this every time we go to a voting booth. We are getting to help decide something. And so I wanted to just share that framework on the front end because it gives you a little bit of a frame of reference. Again, we are going to be going a little deeper in this in session 3, but I have found this to be really fundamental in my work. And I think as you hear our next presenter, Nate, you're going to hear some great ideas, and you can think about where does it land on this spectrum? And with that, then I want to take us to Nate Hilla, who's going to add some spark. He adds spark to my life and my work. I'm going to ask him to add some spark to yours. And with that, Nate, I'm going to stop sharing and give you the screen.
Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you're having a good day. I get to do this a lot because I love working with people. I love presenting. I wish we were face-to-face. It is what it is. I miss my Maskwood leadership roommate, Luke Johnson. I miss you. I see you're on here. If I can share my screen, if you guys can let me share my screen, I can give you pull up my presentation. We have 87 slides of nothing but bullet points. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, get back.
I will clean up my desk. I did this before. I'll clean up my desktop icons. Look at that. Look at all the icons. There is some method to the madness there. So I'm going to share with you today some engagement methods. I was actually born in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So I was born in my hometown, or not my hometown, but my area where I grew up. So in my home county. So I have the fortunate and unfortunate experience of working in the county that I grew up in. It can be an advantage, but yeah, my birthplace is St. Cloud. I get to do and get involved in a lot of different areas of conservation, and I have a social science background. So I have a background of working with people. I was a teacher before, so I use these teaching skills that I learned to help facilitate opportunities like the local work group. So I'm going to give you some effective strategies today on how to work with folks and how to get them engaged with the local work group. And we had some small group discussions with others in my group that we talked about some examples. So, past local work groups, I'm going to hide this. This is what we had: a lot of whining, a lot of crying. Oh, well, nothing ever matters. Oh, what I say never matters. What does NRCS do with this information? And I was able to just jump on. I was in another meeting, but I know Keith presented information this morning about what do we do with that information? Yeah, Luke, I see your text come through. But we're also confused about, the local work group. Well, what's it for? There's Ben Ruley, he's our GIS specialist in the office. That's at a drone training, but that's how we look. That's how we feel or have felt in the past about local work groups. And a lot of times it's the crickets. Nobody shows up. We've made phone calls, we've sent out emails, we've asked people to get involved, and they just say, you know what, we don't care. The government's going to do what they're going to do. So, but we had an idea of something different. Instead of throw up your hands, well, nothing I say is going to ever matter. We wanted to look at the local work group as something different. So it's not that no one would show up. It's maybe that we were doing something wrong. Maybe we as the presenters and the government agencies were doing something wrong where the attendees did not want to come. Well, I'm not going to go sit in there for 2 hours. It doesn't matter. It's not much fun. And we have to rank 47 resource concerns. So how can we get people to these groups? How can we engage folks to get them involved a little bit more? First of all, we started with begging. So the 2 dogs on the right-hand side are mine. I'm holding up the chips at the cabin up on Little Boy Lake by Longville. And all the dogs are in the house. So they're all standing there. But that's what we had to do. Come on, just show up this one year. Just, you know what? We need some local input, and I'll explain reasons why we did this. We start by begging. Then has anybody, I can't see myself on the screen, so I'm just going to turn this on. Has anybody ever picked up the phone and called somebody? We talked about in our small group exercises about calling people and how do you engage those participants to give them a voice? Well, do you know that when you pick this phone up, that phone conversation is local work group input? That you're gathering that information. So if I were you, I'd grab a pen, a notebook, and the phone and make those notes. Some people don't like sharing in front of a big group. So give them an opportunity to share in any way possible. Even if it's a 5-minute phone call with somebody from Farm Bureau or the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association. You work, and I know that we've talked about this in the past. Jamie mentioned something this morning in her presentation about working collaboratively, working as a partnership. And this is John Geisler from St. John's University. He's the land manager. Dennis Fuchs, the district manager here in Stearns County, and Ben Anderson, who is the Stearns County Parks Director. They definitely have an interest in resource concerns in our county. How does their input, what does their input mean? So we need to engage people that we wouldn't otherwise think of. So in 2018, we decided we're going to revamp the work group. We're going to get people more involved. We're going to make a big deal about it. So in this picture, there's me up in the front holding a map, but we decided how you shape your tables has a huge impact on how your audience participates. So you could have everybody in lecture style and you could sit there and listen to your professor like I used to in college in a class of 500 people, explain something, or you can set the tables up to be more interactive. So I found that after the first year, this wasn't quite as effective as this. People learn in different ways. And as a teacher, as a trained teacher, and I love working with people, I observe body language. I observe their nonverbal communication. Are they comfortable in the setting? Would they like more small groups? Do they like the big picture stuff? You need to use a variety of techniques to be able to tease out the information that you're looking for. So last year, I decided we're going to use small group activities. So people felt more comfortable with sharing some of the information with one another. Some folks like to, and I brought this example up in the last training session. When I took the Maskwood leadership course with Donna Ray and Lisa, there isn't anybody that scored higher on the extrovert scale. Lisa, she's never seen anybody score so high. My point is that not everybody's like that. You have people that like to share information one-on-one, just to in a small group. There's some people who are visual learners. There's some people who listen, learn by listening. So you need to engage those folks in a number of different ways. Start showing when you're at these local work groups compelling photos. St. Cloud 1938, 2015 photo. Look at the difference in these two photos. If I'm a participant at the local work group, I see and I'm sitting in on the meeting, I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. All you're doing is showing a photo. You're showing photos of what you do. Here are the things that we've been doing in the past year. Share your successes and share your vision for the future. Where are we going? And I saw Mike put a comment on there. We'll get to that, Mike. Mike Hurst, he put a comment about they had a good discussion in their small group on using local work groups, one watershed, one plan, local work group, having those ties together. That's what we're talking about here. We actually have a drone now. This is a farm site that we fixed a while ago, so this is an older photo, but here's the stream running through the feedlot, and you can kind of see the resource concern here. If you show some of these photos, and here's a picture I took last year of a wetland restoration up by Sauk Center. So with all the partners that were sitting at the table, they're at the local work group. I helped with that. They feel like they belong. They feel like what they've mentioned made a difference. And it doesn't just have to deal with Farm Bill programs. And thanks to Lisa and Donna Ray, they helped, they gave me some tools like using polling software. This is at a Midwest Dairy Initiative conference I spoke at a month ago, or a month and a half ago. And I asked the participants, who do you consider when making decisions? And those polling results, it allows somebody to sit on their phone again, which a lot of the teenagers do, and adults are no different. Our attention spans are getting less. We can put on there which A, B, or C, and we get instant results. So you get instant feedback. This is saved information, and it allows those who don't want to speak out an opportunity to speak. Give them a top 10. So this is the Sports Center top 10 logo. So every day Sports Center has, I just gonna make sure I'm doing good on time here. So they do, yep, we're doing good. Make sure you let me know, Donna Ray. So Sports Center top 10, play games with them. We played a game called Name That Resource Concern. How are your participants supposed to know what you're talking about unless you educate them? I don't know the 47 resource concerns. I just work for the Fish and Wildlife Service. I have no idea what that is. I run a private consulting firm. I'm a private citizen. I have no idea what a resource concern is. So we played a game called Name That Resource Concern. Give them maps, show them opportunities. Here's everybody that signed up in a purple X, and then here's everybody that's interested. Okay, so give them that information. We took thanks, Donna Ray. We gave them $1 million and said, here, put $1 million in 5 to 8 different buckets. Do you want wascobs? Do you want waste storage? Do you want water storage? And we let the participants put $1 million in each one of those buckets. But this, going to Mike's point, this can help folks develop their annual plan of work. Now, I stole this from Todd County. I just Googled it. But it helps districts and partners develop their annual plan of work. We created something called the Supervisor Area Ranking Program out of this. Whoops, let me back up. And our supervisors compete against one another to get to who has the most BMPs installed, who's done the most outreach, who's reached their constituents. So it's kind of a fun competition that has stemmed all from local work group information. It can help put together grant ideas for the Mississippi River Basin Initiative, which is an NRCS initiative, the RCPP program. So those are opportunities that you can gather from that local work group. And I'm a huge Care Bears fan. So here's Share Bear. We talked about it already. Partnerships mean something. So engage those partnerships, engage those partners. So here's a few tips. This is the only bullet slides I've got. So tips for effective local work groups. One, you got to have food, coffee, food. If it were my boss, he'd want to have beer. Most of you know Dennis. And make it seem like all the cool kids are doing it. Hype it up, make it a big deal. Oh, we're doing this local work group thing. We want your input. I talked about it on the radio today. I had a radio spot and I mentioned that I was doing this today, but then I invited our citizens to participate and call and ask questions about it. Use the local work group planning, as Mike alluded to, for one watershed, one plan and other opportunities. Play games. use a variety of delivery techniques and develop and follow an agenda. So when Donna Ray puts, Nate, you got 1 minute up, I got 1 minute to go. Don't go over. And then those are some of the things that you have that you can use it for. So if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. Don't complain. It goes back to the crying baby. And maybe at the end of the day, you're all around the fire singing Kumbaya. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Nate. And you might be intrigued to know that Nate will be back in session 3 with some more, a little more dedicated time to both, like, how do you build consensus and move toward supporting certain options over other options. So thank you very much, Nate.
Yep, and feel free to reach out to me if you've got any. I work for the Stearns County Soil and Water. If you have ideas or want to run something by me.
Very good. Thank you. We are back to Keith, who's going to just do an overview of locally led, its intent and process, and particularly as we look to 2022.
Thank you, Nate, and thank you, Donna Ray. So Nate, impossible to follow. So I'm going to hit you now with a whole bunch of bullet points on slides again, go through the details, back to, Nate gets the fun part, all these apps and drones. Man, I'm jealous. You are my hero, Nate. So my goal in this presentation is to go through some basics of the process. And as Nate said, cover a few things that we have some flexibility on. Nate brought up the 47 resource concerns. I think that's something that we saw in the survey. We want this to be an engaging and learning experience for all. And so hopefully we can, between what Nate provided, some things that I'll share with you, we can come up with a better process for how to make your locally led conservation efforts a little bit more meaningful and successful. So locally led is more than the local working group. So that's one of the things that we're really trying to drive home in this training, and will be in this session and future sessions. But local led includes this local working group meeting that we really focus on, because that is really the starting point and the hinge for where we develop a lot of our needs and assessments and get that engagement. But it's a continual process that does not stop. We need to walk our way through the process to be successful. And it involves a variety of our community shareholders and processes. So we've kind of covered some of that in the past slides and presentations, and will in the future on that community engagement part. So the background on locally led conservation and what we look at it is containing all of these items, from natural resource needs to goals, developing plans and action, carrying out that action plan, implementing the solutions, and then last but not least is always coming back to measuring that success, evaluating, did we meet our goals, and if not, why, and where do we need to adjust going forward. So the 4 major activities, and some of these will be new terms to even many of us at NRCS. I think that this is something that we didn't emphasize, but we're going to target more in this training, are kind of the major activities of locally led. So the one is the conservation needs assessment. That's something we're all really familiar with, whether that's what we call it or not, but it is identifying those local needs and resource concerns, those local items that, as Nate mentioned, that come from a phone call, the visit with the farmer on the site, all of those groups, the conservation action plan. So I think a lot of us do parts of this. We maybe just don't see it all the way through, but it's developing that plan that lays out the timing, priorities, goals, methods of delivery for all things that we need to do. So the program and the non-program, that technical assistance and the financial, and also identifying what's missing. Where do we have holes in our delivery and our plan to address all these priorities that we set up in that conservation needs assessment. And then action plan implementation. This is really where we're using the existing programs, existing technical assistance and practices, but from the previous bullet, what was missing? Do we need to develop something else? Do we need to go pursue a grant? Do we need to have additional staff or focus or training or other opportunities? Nate mentioned RCPP, the MRBI, all these other initiatives and opportunities that are out there. And then the evaluation of the results. So obviously in all plans, how effective were we? What was that outcome? And what do we need to change going forward to better hit our goals and targets next year? So in your handout, you have, and on the screen, you have this locally led conservation model. This is really the driving force between this process and what we're going to focus on part of today and in upcoming sessions. But it starts with the gold circle up there, which is really that conservation district convening the local working groups, moves through the participation, prioritization, goals, funding, planning, activities with financial or technical assistance, the plan implementation, and then the measure of performance. And then it's right back again next year to that conservation district convening the local working group with partners in the community. So the question is, did you complete the cycle last year? Where in the process did you start? Where in the process did you finish? Did you make it all the way back through the process? So we have a quick poll here, and again, anonymous results, but where did your participation end in the cycle last year? Was it with the convening of the meeting? You helped with that? Was it with gathering needs and assessments? So go ahead and answer questions all the way through the end if you were helping measure performance and shaping input for the next local working group.
And Keith, you mean individually, not necessarily your office. It's like
Yes,
what parts?
yes. Thank you for
Great.
clarifying. Where did you, as an individual, where was your engagement? Because some of this is, as Nate said, it's that partnering. NRCS may do one thing, SWCD and other partners may do another. We need to keep that communication up as to where we are going forward as a group, revisiting. We can't really measure performance if we aren't engaging each other on what we did and how we strive to get across the finish line. All right, Lisa, it's a little slower in voting. I think people are getting the after lunch, and there may have been some people that didn't participate at last year. So most of you were into the implementing the plan, so that's awesome. I mean, we have several that kind of cut out early, some that made it all the way to the finish line, but just something to think about and to be engaged with your local process. So involving all of us and all of those steps will make that a better locally led process. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background on where we are now for the 2021 local working groups. We just recently issued a bulletin. We held off, so it was kind of going to coincide with this training and put the information hopefully fresh in your mind to use in the upcoming local working groups. We're emphasizing some additional flexibility, as Nate mentioned, versus what NRCS needs to gather. And then also, we're back to the details of resource concerns and categories and that lingo and the terminology. So hopefully that's information that you'll get shared with at your local meeting by the conservationist and our NRCS staff ahead of time if there's questions or concerns. And then also additional needs beyond those resource concerns and categories. So a couple other handouts that you have, and this is just different ways of presenting, but the confusion that 47 resource concerns that we're evaluating can create is true and honest. And that's a big part of the survey that we received. It's time consuming. We really don't want everyone to go through all 47 resource concerns on all land uses and spend the time. That could be a 5-hour plus meeting, maybe 6, maybe 7. So finding ways to be more efficient and streamlining the results. We at NRCS still need to come up with some prioritization, but that doesn't mean that you at the local working group meeting need to go through every single resource concern on what it is, where it's impacted, how it applies to your counties. So one of the things we're hoping this year is that included in our bulletin is this option for use. It's pre-work. We're looking at some local conservation professionals maybe getting together and prioritizing some of the resource concern categories. So if you come together and say, salt losses to water are not really applicable in our county, you can make that discussion and that up front and then save some time during the locally led process. So the goal is that we can have some improvements up front to identifying and prioritizing, so it's not all done during the course of that meeting. So one of the things that we wanted to do at this point in time, Nate gave some examples of what they've done in Stearns, but we want to hear from others in the chat. What other pre-meeting work or data collection have you done that's been successful? So it could have been last year. I know a lot were doing it with, the challenges with face-to-face meetings. There were a lot of things that were done virtually, meetings, pre-work. So if you would in the chat, start sharing your ideas for what's been successful that you have done for streamlining your process and pre-work for data collection for your local working groups, that would be great. And then, so the end result is, our NRCS staff, we're looking at compiling this information, which is a lot of information because we are looking at it by land use. We are looking at all these resource concerns. But again, that does not mean that at your local working group, you have to pull out the spreadsheet from the bulletin and go step by step through the resource concerns, land uses, all the categories. So come up with some efficiencies, some streamlining, get together with your local conservation professionals and do some of that pre-work to make this a success. I'm not able to see the chat right now, so.
Oh, we can help with that. So
Yeah.
Jerry just noted they have previous year's resource concerns for the participants.
Mhm.
So far we get that. And Mike says the NRCS and SWCD staff sat down last year and prioritized based on previous priorities, one watershed, one plan. Priorities and brought that local work group to edit. John says, oh, hey, wow, I recognize these folks. Narrow down the list of resource concerns that are relevant to the local county. Terry, hey, narrowed down using one watershed, one plan and water planning and some survey with partners and landowners ahead of time.
Excellent. Well, thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, so, reach out to each other. Nate offered it up too as a resource. There's more than one way to get this done. We definitely have a format that we need as an end result, but gathering that information ahead of time all year long through pre-work is going to be a great way to sharpen the focus of your actual local work group meeting. So local working group documentation for documented additional needs. The other part of it, besides the resource concerns and categories that we want to hear from, is what additional needs and priorities are there? So I mentioned this earlier, but we do compile all this information. So the comments that you put down, we put into one big document and try to categorize, but it could include things like practices, land use needs, education, training. It's more than just the programmatic and the resource concern items that you need that you've identified throughout the year from your locally led process. So what additional needs will help you deliver your local conservation? One of the other questions that we're looking at you discussing this year at your local meetings is what are the Farm Bill comments? So Farm Bill programs for NRCS, how to make that better locally. What can we do? What can we change? What do you need for improvements? And then non-Farm Bill programs. So general technical assistance, any other program that doesn't fall under the Farm Bill. And then also additional resource concerns or additional resources needed for outreach. Are there other things that you need at the local level? So again, this is a way that you can compile all that stuff together on the summary sheet from your local work group, submit it in, and it comes to us for review at the state level. And we share that with the leadership team, with all of the others, the State Technical Advisory Committee, again, trying to make the process as informed as we can and make changes for next year. So in summary, locally led is more than just a local working groups. It's that cycle that continues all year long, but really is key upon that local working group meeting and the collaboration between all that entire community at the local level. It's a process with specific parts and actions. So we're trying to spell out those actions a little bit more this year in terms of the processes that go into that all the way through the implementation and evaluation. And it's a continual cycle. So this is something that we just need to try to find value in, hopefully today's discussion and the future sessions will help with that and make it easier to continue the cycle for the benefit of your local needs. And it's also key to ensuring that local needs are identified. We're engaged, but we aren't engaged as much as you are at the local level, and hearing from all the participants, in the locally led meetings is really what's key towards that information coming up to the state conservationist and helping us to make the needed changes and improvements to our conservation delivery in NRCS. So with that, I think that is what I had for kind of the local led update on the process for 2021 and some more background.
Thank you so much, Keith. And we are at about 3 minutes. We have just a glimpse about what's coming up, followed by a quick poll, final poll for each of you. So we hope today that what you saw in terms of meaning and why local work group matters, what its fiscal and other impacts are, and some changes to the process based on your feedback is excellent. We do want to announce that the SWCD elected supervisors will also have an opportunity to be in a session, and that will be on Wednesday, March 31st. It is a one session only, not a series, and it is the same time, 10:30 or 10 to 11:30 or 1:30 to 3, and that promotional information is going out soon. And then we also want to invite you, if you haven't yet registered, to come next week for making the local work group informed. And I see that the poll has now launched. So we have 2 questions. Did something about locally led conservation become clear to you today? And will this information help you enhance your practice of locally led conservation in the future? Again, this first session was inspirational intended, as well as some technique, and we will get to more of the technique and so on as the series continues. We also invite any final questions you have in the chat. We're gathering those, and we will send out a post-meeting packet based on your requests. So final call for any final thoughts from anyone as part of the Zoom as we move to wrap it up. Keith, any closing thoughts with the session this afternoon?
No, I'd just like to thank you both for the facilitation and coordination, and again, thank all the participants and communication. So if you do have things that pop up in your mind later, please route them in. I see we've got some chats coming in from Luke Johnson. Thank you, Luke. But yeah, this, just like the local process, is a continuation. We're open for feedback all year round. So please continue to, if you have challenges or issues with the local led process, local work group, please submit them in through your local conservation office, your local DC.
And with that, we'll come to the end. Our next session will also include some experienced with local work groups, sharing some of their tips and best practices, and try to have some baseline information from those of you who say you're not familiar with locally led conservation or local work groups at all. With that, we thank you for your participation and end this training session.
All right, thanks for coming.